I don't wanna grow up, I'm a curious kid. The world has 100 questions I can play with. So I'll open my arms and eyes and wonder every day till the day I die. No one really knows why gravity exists.
All right, tonight, Wonderfest speaker is Dan Werthimer, Chief Technologist at the Berkeley SETI Research Center. Huzzah, go Cal, go Bears. There Dan directs the projects, many projects with names that are very cool acronyms. Serendip, Casper, and my personal favorite, Boink. Boink, yes. For 20 years, Dan was chief scientist of SETI at Home, which beautifully democratized SETI for many millions of people around the world, but is now in hibernation. Early in his astronomy career, Dan was associate professor in physics, the physics and engineering departments of San Francisco State University. And he taught at many foreign universities, one in Uganda, Peru, Egypt, Ghana, Ethiopia. Dan was always one step ahead of the law. Impressive. Dan is the unacknowledged president of Wonderfest Board of Advisors. I say unacknowledged because he hasn't yet fully acknowledged it, but I maintain he is. He earned the 2019 Carl Sagan Prize for Science Popularization awarded by Wonderfest. And more recently, in 2021, he earned the Frank Drake Award of the SETI Institute, which is really quite a glorious award. And if you think you've heard that name Drake, Frank Drake, you'll learn about that name tonight in the Drake equation. Dan is a member, this is much more impressive than those awards. Dan is a member of the Homebrew Computer Club with the likes of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. According to Dan, this is a quote, everyone in the Homebrew Computer Club got filthy rich except Dan. Please welcome the SETI pioneer and the not yet filthy rich Dan Werthimer.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. I want to talk to you about this question, are we alone? Is anybody out there? And the Fermi paradox, maybe a little bit about the great filter. And I also want to talk a little bit about some of the SETI experiments that we're working on or planning. And I'm hoping that a lot of you will chime in with questions and comments and ideas about the Fermi paradox. And there are also a couple of experts in the room. Dick Long there is he is an astronomer, and he is a part of our SETI group, and he's also a molecular biologist. He's done a lot of thinking about evolution and how life gets started. And so if there are questions about sort of how does life get started or about evolutionary biology, I probably won't be able to answer, but maybe Dick will. And also another SETI expert is Tucker. And you think of Tucker as the founder of Wonderfest, but before he did Wonderfest, he did a lot of SETI work. And he wrote some of the algorithms that are used in the SETI at Home program. I saw you might be a volunteer at SETI at Home.
No, but we got one of those people who...
Yeah. Anyway, so there are 8 million people that use the code that Tucker wrote to look for ETs. I think that algorithm is the most sensitive search that Earthlings have ever done, looking for radio signals from ET using Tucker's algorithms. Okay, so before we get into the Fermi paradox, I want to talk about, Tucker mentioned Frank Drake, and Frank Drake was a pioneer of SETI, unfortunately died a couple of years ago, and in 1961, he came up with this thing called the Drake equation. Not many people have equations named after them. And so the Drake equation is a way to calculate the number of civilizations that we can communicate with in the Milky Way galaxy, that N there. And all you have to do is multiply these numbers together. And the problem with the Frank Drake equation is that we don't know what any of these numbers are. But it's a way to break a big question, are we alone, into smaller questions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these factors that go into the Drake equation before we get into the Fermi paradox. So I want to show you how that equation works. So the first thing in there is about how many stars there are in the galaxy. There's a couple 100 billion stars. Oh, by the way, as you go down this equation, we know a lot about this number, the stars, you know, and as you get further and further, it's like it's more and more unknown. And that's why you can't really use this equation as a way to calculate, because we really don't know what these numbers are. But it's kind of a fun way to break this problem up. So we do know about stars in the galaxy, a few hundred billion stars. The next thing, that P, is for planets. It's about how many planets there are, so how many of those stars have planets going around them. And that, if you'd asked me 30 years ago, are there planets going in other stars, astronomers didn't figure that out until recently, because the planets are little dinky things. You know, 1 million Earths could fit inside, so they're really fit inside the sun. So they're really hard to find. But now we know that there are more planets than there are stars. About 1 trillion planets in the Milky Way galaxy. So now the first two were about stars and planets. The next thing, E, is for environment. How many of those planets have the right environment for where you could get life? Do they have a nice temperature? Do they have the right chemicals? All the things you need to get life. We don't know much about that, but we're beginning to maybe have an idea. Looks like a lot of planets might be suitable for life, but we really don't know. Okay, the next thing is L, is for life. So once you've got a planet that has the right environment, how often on one of those Goldilocks planets do you get life? And we really have no idea about that one. And then, okay, the next one is, okay, you got life. How often do you get, the I is for intelligence. So you start with simple life, and then how often do you get intelligent life? And we have no idea, but we'll talk about it anyway. And then, okay, now you got intelligent life. The C is for communication. Once you have intelligence, how often do you have civilizations that figure out how to do technology? You know, do they get radio or lasers or some way that we could communicate with them? And then the last thing, L, is how long do they live, the longevity of the civilization. So as soon as they develop radio and lasers and ways that we could talk across between the stars, do they also develop bio weapons, nuclear weapons, and blow themselves up? Do they learn to stop killing each other? Because they could last a long time. You know, we're 5 billion years old. Earth is about 5 billion years old, but it's going to be around another couple billion years. And there are some stars that are 10 billion years old. So if they get through that bottleneck where they're killing each other and figure out how to live together, there could be very advanced civilizations out there. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about some of the factors. I mentioned one of the early factors is how many planets. So planets are hard to find. There are a couple of different ways. There are a few different ways to find them. But the first way that was finding people used is when the planet goes around the star. It's called the wiggle method. It pulls on the star a little bit. Actually, the star and the planet are going around each other. But the star doesn't wiggle very much because the planet is pretty small compared to the star. But it moves a little bit, kind of just walking speed. And you could detect that if you have a really good spectrometer. What happens is the colors from the star shift a little bit. It's called the Doppler shift. It gets a little redder and a little bluer. But it's very, very small change of color. That's why it was so hard to measure the wiggling star. But if you see a star wiggling, that betrays the presence of a planet, even though you can't see the planet. Another technique that was more recent is the occultation method. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is a planet. That little black dot is a planet getting in front of the star. And when that happens, it blocks some of the starlight, and the star dims down a little bit. Not by very much, but if you see a dimming star, that betrays the presence of a planet. But the problem is, if you look up at the stars at night, they're twinkling because the atmosphere is dimming them and making them brighter, and you know the atmosphere kind of makes them twinkle. But if you go up in space and you see a twinkling star, that's probably because if the star is dimming, that's probably because there's a planet getting in front of it. So Kepler was this telescope that was basically a camera in space. So get above the atmosphere that makes the stars twinkle, and if you see the dimming, especially if it's periodic, when the planet comes around again, then you say, hey, we found a planet. And that Kepler found thousands of planets, and some of the multiple planetary systems, and now we know about planets that are in the Goldilocks zone. these are hot, these are too cold, and these are in the habitable zone. So we're beginning to find, now I think we have thousands of planets that we know of that are habitable, at least in the zone where you might have a nice temperature. And this is a little kind of evolution of the history of finding planets over a few years. So the first planets that were found were this is how heavy they are. And so the first planets, the easy ones were like Jupiter size or even bigger than Jupiter. Those are the easy ones to find. Also the ones that are going around their planet, this is how long it takes to go around their star. And if they go around very quickly and they're big heavy things, we can find them pretty easily. So those were the first ones to find. And then we started finding Neptune, and now we're finding Earth-sized planets. And we still can't find the Earth-sized things that are going around every year or two, but we find the ones that are going around every few days. Those are getting pretty easy to find. And it doesn't mean that there aren't planets that are going around every year or two that are the Earth-sized. There are probably a lot of planets down here. It's just limited by the technology and the size of our telescope and so on. So we think there are probably lots of Earth-like planets, but we don't know that for sure yet. Little rocky planets. So, okay, you might remember the next factor. Once you get a planet that's in the Goldilocks zone, how often does life get started? And this is, you can ask Dick about this, but we really don't know a lot about how life gets started. But one thing that makes us sort of optimistic is that life got started on Earth very early. So the oldest rocks you can find have fossils on them. And so we think because it happened quickly on Earth, even though we don't understand exactly how it happened, just because it happened quickly, it might happen, means it was probably a pretty easy thing. But we don't know for sure how often that would happen on other planets. But people have done experiments on Earth where they simulated the conditions of the early Earth, and we knew there was methane and ammonia and water and hydrogen. You put that stuff in a flask. We also knew there was lightning, so you put sparks in the flask. And you don't get gorillas crawling on this thing, but you get the basic building blocks of life, amino acids, the stuff that you and I are made of, pretty complicated molecules. And those building blocks of life, we think, then formed eventually self-replicating molecules like RNA and DNA. So we're beginning to understand how you go from these really simple molecules that were around in the early Earth to more complicated and eventually self-replicating molecules. Okay, the next factor you might remember is if you get started, how often you get intelligence. And it took a long time to get smart things on Earth, billions of years. So that we're a lot more uncertain about. We think probably the universe is teeming with simple life. It might be in our own backyard, even in our own solar system, we might find simple life. But intelligence is probably much more rare. And the reason we think it's rare is because it took billions of years on Earth but one thing that makes us kind of optimistic is that it happened several times. So there are a lot of intelligent creatures, and some have bigger brains than we do. Dolphins have very sophisticated brains, although they use a lot of that brain to do sonar and stuff like that. Anyway, there's a bunch of smart creatures. And I think if we blow ourselves up, if we don't destroy all the mammals, pretty intelligent creatures will pop back up. There seem to be evolutionary selection pressures where intelligence is advantageous. There's a lot of ways to succeed on the planet, so you can just be smart, you can have a hard shell, you can have sharp teeth, but one of the ways that you can maybe succeed is to be smart in a complicated environment to find food or hunt prey. Intelligence is something that may be evolutionary advantageous. So we think planets that have complicated environments, evolution may put pressure on to have intelligence. So, well, that took a long time. So there may even be life in our own backyard. There's a moon going around Jupiter. Jupiter has a lot of moons going around it, but one of them is called Europa, and that's a really cool place because it's got a liquid ocean, and that ocean is warm, and at the bottom of the ocean are these tidal vents where we think life got started on Earth, where there's a lot of heat and sort of a little mini volcano at the bottom of the ocean that outputs a lot of organics and energy and complicated molecules, and that's what's going on also, not just at the bottom of our ocean, but at the bottom of Europa's ocean. So there may be life in that ocean, but the problem is that the ocean is covered with about 30 miles thick ice on the top. So even though the ocean is warm, there's ice on the top. And we'd like to somehow get through that ice and see if there's something swimming in the ocean. That's a hard problem. But there's another moon called Enceladus going around Saturn. And it's got the same kind of ocean covered with ice, but it's got cracks in the ice. And there's geysers, kind of these fissures, and the water's squirting out. And we'd like to fly something through the plume and see if there's some single-celled creatures in the water that's squirting out through the cracks. And NASA and ESA, the Europeans, are planning those kind of missions. So maybe, and if we find life in our own backyard on one of these moons, or maybe Titan, then life is everywhere. So we might know the answer to that question about how often simple life gets started in the next 10 or 20 years if we can fly through this plume, and if there's cells there, if there's life there, that means it's probably everywhere. Okay, that's enough about the Drake equation. I want to switch over to the Fermi paradox. Okay, so what is the Fermi paradox? So these guys were sitting around at lunch at Los Alamos. There were 4 of them. One of them was Fermi. Another guy was Edward Teller, who's the big pioneer in the hydrogen bomb. Not the first atomic bomb, that was Oppenheimer, led that crew, but the hydrogen bomb. By the way, Oppenheimer did not want to build the hydrogen bomb, which is, much more powerful. He thought it was too dangerous, but Teller pushed it, and so he won that argument and built a bomb. And also sitting at lunch were Herbert York and Emil Konopinski, and they were just kind of bullshitting, and there's just 4 of them having lunch together, and they were just talking about flying saucers and UFOs. And then sort of Fermi said, "Where is everybody?" So I think that everybody understood what he was talking about. So what was he talking about when he said, "Where is everybody?" And so what I think what he was saying was, okay, the Earth is about 5 billion years old, but some stars are 10 billion years old. Actually, a lot of stars are 10 billion years old. So if life is abundant, some of these civilizations are going to be billions of years ahead of us, and if they're billions of years ahead of us, they should be zooming around the galaxy. They should be visiting us at, landing at the UN Plaza or the White House or the Kremlin or I don't know. And so we should have seen them all. They should be visiting. Space travel should be no big deal for them. And we're going to know how to do travel between the stars in 100 or 1,000 years. So a billion years, certainly they would have figured it out. And so the conclusion, according to the Fermi paradox, is that since we don't see these guys landing at the White House, that means we're alone. There's no... So that's what Fermi was talking about. It's also, he's not the first guy to think of this, but it's named after him. I think this guy in Russia, Tsiolkovsky, thought of it. Maybe others have thought of it, but it goes by different names. It goes by, if you're Russian, you probably think of it as Tsiolkovsky paradox. Also, a guy named Ewing, another guy named Hart wrote extensively about this. But in the US, we call it the Fermi paradox. And I'm just going to go into it a little bit today, but if you are interested in the Fermi paradox, there's a couple of really good books. And one is by Ben Zuckerman and Hart, the same guy who the hypothesis is named after, and it's called Extraterrestrials, Where Are They? But a really fun book, one of my favorites, is called If the Universe is Teeming with Aliens, Where is Everybody? 75 Solutions to the Fermi Paradox and the Problem of Extraterrestrial Life. And it's Stephen Webb. And I recommend the second edition. The first edition is called 50 Solutions to the Fermi Paradox. But he thought of a few more and wrote another book about it. And it's got some fun stuff in it as well. But the first edition is quite good too. Okay, so I want to talk about just some of the possible solutions. And I wanted to say this is super speculative. This is the kind of thing that's fun to talk about at dinner, but there's really not a lot of scientific consensus about any of this stuff. And I think physicists and even biologists, I think some of the stuff about the fate of civilizations is not so much maybe a scientific problem. It could be more of a philosophical or anthropologist problem or social scientist. So there's a lot of different fields that it touches on. And you can kind of argue till you're blue in the teeth about whether the universe is filled with advanced life or not, and the solution to the Fermi paradox, but nobody really knows. And so that's why I use SETI. I'm trying to actually answer the question. But anyway, so let's talk about some of these possible questions that the Fermi paradox addresses. So one of the ideas of the Fermi paradox, one of the solutions is that maybe they're not zooming around because Earth is a very special, very rare planet. And there's a whole book about this. That Peter Ward and Don Brownlee wrote there at University of Washington in Seattle. And what they say in this book is that life on Earth is very improbable set of super special circumstances because of the things that happen on Earth are going to be not happening elsewhere. And they said, okay, so one thing they said was that the Earth is just the right distance from the sun, not too hot, not too cold. If you move it a little bit one way or the other, then you wouldn't have life, or you wouldn't have advanced life. Another thing they said is that the sun is just the right distance from the center of the galaxy. And their argument there was that if you get it in near the center of the galaxy, a lot of supernova exploding, you don't want to be near a supernova when it goes off, lots of radiation. And then they also said that life needs a large moon, so the Earth, the moon, there are lots of moons in the solar system going around the other planets, but we only have one moon. It's the biggest moon in the hundreds of moons in the solar system. And they argued that that moon creates tides and does a lot of things that make that are useful for life and evolution. They also argued that you need a big planet near the Earth like Jupiter to keep the asteroids from smashing into the Earth. So it kind of herds the asteroids and keeps them away from us. And the asteroids are kind of bad, when hit 65, it wiped out the dinosaurs. But some people argue that's actually good. You want sort of stochastic evolution. You want things to kind of wipe out the dinosaurs once in a while and make room for us mammals. So you can argue these kind of either way. There's a lot of, by the way, it's a very controversial book. So they argue that there's just a lot of sort of fine tuning. They said that the tilt of the Earth with respect to the orbit going around the sun makes for very nice seasons, and they think the seasons are important. It's good to have a warm thing, a cold thing. I don't know if that's really true. I doubt it. Anyway, they said like everything is just right, and that there's nothing going to be that has all. There's no planets elsewhere in the galaxy, or very few, that have all the things you need. So I kind of disagree with their stuff. Most people think that the Earth is not that special, and I want to sort of. It goes against this kind of philosophy called the principle of mediocrity, also called the Copernican principle. Maybe Earth is just a typical rocky planet in kind of a normal planetary system. We're kind of in we're not in a special place in the galaxy. So what some people say, and these are not my words, I'm just writing them down here, that these assumptions are kind of very restrictive and unimaginative. Maybe we don't need life exactly like humans. Maybe there are different chemistries. So there are these things called extremophiles on Earth that live at temperatures of boiling water, acid environments, freezing, really. And so maybe you don't need something just like Earth. Maybe you can get life on M-stars, a very common planet. Maybe you have radiation tolerance if your star is giving a lot of radiation or something like that. But the idea is that life will adapt to different kinds of situations. So maybe you don't need to have exactly the situation. If life gets started on a planet that has strong radiation, life will figure out how to evolution will create selection pressures for things that are radiation tolerant. So it's not really a hypothesis prediction. It's kind of a description of how life arose on Earth and the selection of factors that suit that particular case for that particular life. But anyway, so a little more stuff. So I think what matters is not whether there's anything unusual about the Earth. There's going to be something unusual on every planet. And what matters is any of the Earth's circumstances are not only unusual but essential. So he's just saying everything on Earth, there's nothing quite exactly like it, but maybe that's not important. Another way to say this, one particular path is improbable. There may be many paths that lead to intelligence. Okay, here's another way out of the Fermi paradox. Remember I said, well, there are billions here, how about they be zooming around? But maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe space travel is actually harder than we think. We don't know how to travel between the stars. Maybe there's, they do it in Star Trek and stuff, but maybe that's the wrong kind of future. So you can calculate how much energy it takes to get to the stars, and if you want to get there in human lifetime, it's an incredible amount of energy. We need a sort of matter, antimatter, or some ridiculous thing that we don't know anything about. Work drive. Maybe it really is hard. Well, one way out of that is if you go really slowly. If you don't mind taking 1 million years to get to the stars, doesn't take a lot of energy. The hard part is getting up fast and then slowing down when you get to the other side. Takes a huge amount of energy. But if you don't mind going slow, then maybe that's not such a big deal. You might be able to scoop up the fuel on the way. There's a lot of hydrogen out there. There's another thing I'll show you later called laser sailing, where you don't have to take the fuel with you. You kind of put out a big sail in space and shine a bright laser against it, and it'll move. Yeah.
I was looking at a thing Lockheed Martin's got their space thing. They sent a thing out today.
Yeah.
And they've got these solar panels on the moon, and they're all vertical solar panels and getting light, and then they're doing something, and it's like generating energy with water. I don't know. It's unusual.
Right. Recently, they have found water on the moon underground. There's a little bit of water that we can access, but most of it's like many miles deep, so there's really not easy for us to access. But there could be life down there where there's water, so that's interesting. There are ways to make energy, like you were saying, on the moon. And some people think that if you want to build one of these spacecrafts that does interstellar travel, you might want to build it on the moon. Because it takes a lot less energy to get off the moon. There's a lot light, not so much gravity.
If you're going to use laser sailing, how do you slow down?
So the first laser sail, which I'll show later, the star shot thing, you just fly right through it, going almost at the speed of light, and you get about 10 seconds to take a picture because you fly through it. Yeah, you could. Okay, so another way to slow down if you use laser sailing is hope that they have a laser. Yeah.
I hate crossing over politics on this one, but like the laser sailing, that reminds me of a particular politician who said, "Oh yeah, we got Jewish space lasers."
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But then, no, seriously, it's like with the laser sailing we use, let's say for example, we have lasers here on Earth. Could the laser that is beamed from the Earth to the transponder in question be used directly to actually speed up or slow it down? Because we're talking like light years, if not millions of miles away.
Yeah. So I'm going to show this later, but the question is can you keep shining the light as you travel long distance? Actually, what they've decided is it's a really hard problem because the laser gets weaker and weaker as you go further and further away. So what the plan is for the first thing that does interstellar travel is they only shine the laser for 2 minutes, you get a really bright laser, 50 gigawatts, and you shine it on the sail, and by the time it leaves, and it gets up near the speed of light, and by the time it leaves the solar system, you turn the laser off, because by then it's too dim, and then it just coasts the rest of the way. Anyway, so we don't know how to do that, but okay, let me get back to this thing. So you guys have a lot of good questions, though. So, oh, did I miss this? Okay, so another possibility is that maybe they're super advanced, but they are getting tired of space travel, and they've gone through their exponential phase, where they just wanted more money and bigger cars or whatever. But they're not so much interested in sort of conquering the galaxy and zooming around. They may know how to do it, but they're more interested in literature and music and poetry. And then some people say, well, yeah, maybe that's true, but maybe not all of them. All it takes is one civilization that wants to conquer the galaxy and build self-replicating robots, and you can calculate how long it would take if you have self-replicating robots before they're all over the galaxy. That wouldn't take very long. So it may be hard to prevent all civilization. Maybe you need interstellar police or something like that. Okay, another possibility that we talked a little bit with the Drake equation is maybe they all destroy themselves. Maybe once you get space travel and you can travel between the stars, you also develop bioweapons, nanoweapons, and AI, and you wipe yourself out. So if you wipe out just mammals, like if you just kill all humans, that's not a big deal. We pop back up in a million years. And that's just a little blink of an eye in our history. So that, so we could do that 5,000 times, wipe out humanity, and we'd eventually get through. But if you killed like every carbon-based life form, that would set us back billions of years. And you could only do that once or twice. So now we don't know how to kill every life form on the planet, all carbon-based life. But I think if you wait long enough and you ask GPT Chat 17 how to do it, it'll probably know how to do it. Yeah.
Why could we only, if it set us back 5 billion years each time, how come we can only do that twice?
Oh, maybe once. Because if you kill all life, then that takes billions of years. I mean, it took billions of years on Earth, so presumably it'd take billions of years again. But if you just kill mammals, or like you kill humans, and if you leave a few chimps, then we'll, evolve back to humans in maybe a million years or so.
I misunderstood. I thought maybe there were only 10 billion years left.
Yeah, that's right. So maybe if you kill all life, I think you caught me there. If you kill all life, maybe you can't get back to humans in the time that the Earth has. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, you don't want to kill all life. It's okay to kill all of humanity.
No, it's not my plan.
Okay, so a little bit more about killing everybody. So there's an interesting little paper called "Why the Future Doesn't Need Us." It's kind of a scary paper, and it's by a guy named Bill Joy, who was a computer technologist. He started a company called Sun Microsystems, kind of an amazing one of these early computer companies. And he actually left the field because he thought that eventually computing technology, if you combine it with nanotechnology and biotechnology, it's too dangerous. And so he just didn't want to. We had a couple professors at UC Berkeley too that just stopped teaching their kids physics because they thought it was too dangerous. So what his argument was, he kind of goes through the history of people on the Earth. His argument was that 100,000 years ago, the weapons we had were sort of clubs, and one person might be able to kill a few people with a club. And then sort of as technology comes along, eventually we get, guns and you could kill a few people, and then we get AR-15 rifles, and a crazy person could kill 100 people. And this kind of evolves to, nuclear weapons, bioweapons. And he thinks that eventually what will happen is one crazy person will be able to talk to their desktop computer and say, I want you to design a smallpox virus that is super contagious, super deadly, and I want you to build it for me, not just design it. And this crazy person won't have to know anything won't have to have a PhD in molecular biology like that. You won't have to know anything. You just talk to your GBT chat, and it will, with the nanotechnology, the little robot will assemble it for you, and it'll release it for you, and that'll wipe out all of humanity. And that's really hard to control as we develop these technologies. It's really hard to, and he wrote a lot about how, could you have countermeasures, could you build in safety, but it's really hard to avoid that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, this sounds almost like we're crossing into conspiracy theories right now, because I remember hearing yet another crazy, we call this a podcaster that would say, oh yeah, it's like, we got weather weapons that you can manipulate the weather and all of that. It's like, is that even part of the, why the future does not need us?
He's kind of predicting, he's predicting what might happen in 100 years, what would happen if you extrapolate on nano and biotechnology. So this is a little different from what people are saying right now that we have weather weapons. Although actually we do have weather modification, but very early stages. But there are, he's just saying that this technology is sort of inevitable. If you kind of extrapolate about where we've been, then maybe that's where we're going. It's a little different from a conspiracy theory, I think. It's just kind of trying to predict the evolution of where our technology is going.
Right, because really it's like, with so many people believing in these conspiracy theories.
It only takes one person, not a conspiracy, it takes multiple people.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, he's not so much arguing that countries would do this. Like, he thinks there may be a way to keep countries from launching their nuclear weapons. If we can all have a kind of global government, there's various ways. We may be able to prevent that. But what he's kind of more worried about is not one country starting nuclear war or biological warfare, but more that we're going to make it possible for one individual to kill a lot of people. And anyway, in this paper, it's only about 10 pages long, but he argues back and forth, like he says, well, maybe you could develop countermeasures, and maybe you could do this, and maybe there are ways to prevent this. But in the end, he thinks maybe it's going to be really hard to prevent this from happening. Anyway, I read that when it came out, and it kind of, it was a kind of scary paper, and I think there's still a lot of, maybe not truth, but there's some probability that we're in big trouble. And he does talk about in this paper ways that we might be able to prevent it. And that's through kind of regulation of these technologies. But it's a very difficult problem, I think. So anyway, I wanted to bring this up because it kind of sheds light on the Fermi paradox. Maybe they're not landing at the White House and the UN Plaza because they all blow themselves up. But it's hard to argue that they all blow themselves up. Maybe some of them get through their bottleneck. So the clever ones figure out how to live together. This is just what I just said. So maybe, perhaps, but it would be hard to get all the civil. That's the wrong slide for the wrong thing. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, a couple more things about the Fermi paradox, a couple more solutions. So I'm not going to go through all 75. I just picked some of the fun ones. Okay, so one possibility is something called the Great Silence. And the idea of the Great Silence is, okay, we've been looking for other civilizations for a while, we haven't found them. Maybe they're all really quiet. Maybe they don't want to get in touch with us. They're not broadcasting any signals. Why is it so quiet out there? And one possibility is there is maybe the first civilization or one of the early civilizations that is much more capable than we are. Also happens to be a very aggressive civilization. They're very nasty, and they're trying to conquer the whole galaxy, and everybody's just laying low. So maybe maybe we should stop sending off all these lasers and radio signals out, television signals out into space. But there could be a reason why we haven't found ET yet. Another possibility is we are just alone. Maybe the rare Earth guys are right. Maybe there's something. One of those factors in the Drake equation is very, very small, and that life is either super rare or we are the only civilization in the galaxy, or maybe even in the universe. I sort of doubt it. I'm kind of an optimist. I think life is going to be out there. The universe is probably teeming with life, but that is a possible solution that we should think about. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about SETI, and I probably won't finish talking about SETI, but because I think it'd be fun to just discuss some of this and have discussion will be interesting. I spent the last 50 years working on SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Dick and Doug Seiler, where'd Doug go? Also worked on it, and Tucker worked on it. And I think some of you maybe volunteered and SETI at home worked on it with us. So I want to go back and talk about kind of the early SETI projects. So Giordano Bruno, about 500 years ago, when he talked about maybe there could be life on other planets and other worlds, he got burned at the stake. That was not a good thing to say. Tucker mentioned that I have a couple of awards. One is the Wonderfest Award that Tucker awarded me and his crew, and the Drake Award. But this is kind of one of my favorite awards. Well, okay, the Wonderfest Award is my favorite. But I have a Giordano Bruno Award named after this guy who's burned at the stake. Anyway, the early ideas are sort of peculiar. So Gauss 200 years ago said that we should look for ET by making a giant geometric structure on Earth, a triangle and big squares, and ET would look down and see that we knew about the Pythagorean theorem. And then von Littron a couple hundred years ago said we should get in touch with ET by digging a circular ditch 20 miles across and fill that with kerosene, and then use this match, not to scale, to make a bright ring of fire, and ET would see this bright circle of light and get in touch with us. Charles Crow, also a couple hundred years ago, said that we should reflect sunlight to the Martians using these large mirrors, and several mirrors, one where he lived in Paris and the others to outline the shape of the Big Dipper, and ET would see these bright lights and get in touch. These were kind of the best ideas at the time, and now we sort of laugh at them. And I think what that means is that people will be laughing at what I'm doing, and in 200 years, people just say, "Oh, man, why did you look for a radio wave? They should look for subspace communication or tachyons." And they'll show a picture in their PowerPoint, where people just kind of laugh at what we were doing. So it might be that all the SETI experiments that we're doing, mostly we look for radio and laser signals, and kind of, because that's what Earthlings do, we send off radio signals. So we might be doing completely the wrong thing. So I think what that means is that even though I'm very proud of what we've done looking for civilization, and we haven't found anything, that doesn't mean they're not out there. Maybe we're looking for the wrong kind of thing. Anyway, in the last century, most of the searching that's been done has been looking for radio signals. Yeah?
So, quick question about that. So, imagine civilization so killed themselves so much. You're looking in the
How could they go dark?
How could they actually go dark?
Yeah.
Technologically.
Yeah, okay, so that's really interesting. So,
Can you repeat the question?
yeah, so the question is, if you're an advanced civilization, could you go dark? Could you go like invisible so that other civilizations wouldn't see there?
You're looking across a wide range of electromagnetic spectrum.
Yeah.
It's hard
Right.
What sort of technology?
So, you know, if you look at what's happening with the Earth, so the Earth is getting brighter and brighter, television and radar. We keep building more and more transmitters and cell phones and stuff like that. Although it's not getting as bright, it's not growing as fast as it used to. And I think that's because we're starting to use more directed. So these omnidirectional things like television, they go off into space. You know, I Love Lucy's gone past 10,000 stars, and the nearby stars have seen The Simpsons. So we're bright. We're brighter than the sun now. But what's happening is we're going to more directed communication, because if you blast every which way, including off into space, that omnidirectional transmission, you're wasting a lot of energy. And if you use fibers, you know, you're just, it's much more directed. The beam is just going down this little thing. It's not, and so now we're going to more sort of beamed communication, where we're not leaking stuff off into space. So you can imagine an advanced civilization that's more kind of worried about energy, may not be sending off all this accidental, all that communication could be done on fibers.
So in terms of the Drake equation, then it's at one characteristic of how long the civilizations live.
Yes.
It may not really mean that, it may mean how long the civilization.
Very astute, yeah. Right. So he said that maybe the longevity factor in the Drake equation shouldn't be how long do civilizations live, but how long do they transmit? I think.
That we can detect.
Right. How long are they detectable? So it's not just whether they develop communication, but how often do they actually want to communicate, or maybe have artifacts of their, you know, their television or radar or something that we could detect. And if they're going quiet, like I think you were saying, then we won't never know about them. Yeah. I think, by the way, when Frank came up with that equation, it really wasn't meant to be a famous equation. He was organizing a meeting. He thought, you know, we're going to talk about life. Maybe we should, you know, break it down into different questions, and we'll have a day devoted to this thing and a day devoted to that thing. And he just scribbled it out on the board. And now there have been a lot of improvements, you know, and it's just kind of what you were saying. Maybe the L should be different, and they break it out into 10 factors. And there are a lot of people that have improved on that. But it's kind of useful to have about 5 factors. But you can have 100 if you want. Okay, so I want to talk about these early SETI searches. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff we're doing now. So one of the early searches was in the 1920s. Mars was very close to the Earth, and the Navy turned off all the transmitters, and they built this gadget that could turn radio waves into pictures, and they thought maybe they'd found some signals from the Martians, and that people thought this was a face, but I think it looks like noise to me anyway. There were these optical SETI projects. I think I'm going to skip some of these slides because I want to get to more discussion with you guys. So I think there have been a lot of changes over the years about what we should look for, whether we should look at certain stars, and as we learn more about the universe, we've changed our ideas. So I think what that means is we could easily be doing the wrong thing in SETI right now. And so I think if we're going to do SETI, we should try a lot of different things. The multiple strategies best. Half of the astronomy discoveries are serendipitous, meaning people found things they weren't looking for. They just happened to come across something that wasn't expected. And SETI might fall into that. It won't be somebody like me deliberately looking for ET. It'll be some physics experiment looking at gravitational waves or something like that, and find a little glitch in the data or something and pursue it. A lot of really interesting discoveries have been made that way. Anyway, so we talked a little bit about this, that you can imagine some kind of artifact that wasn't really meant for us, just a TV signal coming off their planet, or a navigational beacon or something, or maybe a deliberate signal. And if they want to get in touch with us, maybe they've seen oxygen in our atmosphere. If they're nearby, they've seen our television broadcast. People have deliberately transmitted signals. This is very controversial. I don't think it's a good idea. Most people don't think it's a good idea. It's called METI, or active SETI. I think right now we should just be listening, learning more about the universe. Maybe there's a reason that it's very quiet. Maybe there's some aggressive civilizations out there. They're going to come and eat us. But some people have deliberately transmitted messages. But I think right now we're an emerging civilization. We're just getting into the game. We're just learning what's out there. We're learning a little bit about our universe. And it may be dangerous to deliberately transmit messages into space. So I think for now, we're kind of an emerging civilization. We should be just listening at first. But some people don't disagree. So let's see. I think I'm going to skip some of this stuff. What have I want to talk about some of the new things. So, right, the telescope we use for SETI at home, that thing fell down. It's not our first telescope. Some people think that it was zapped by hostile space aliens. Anyway, we're testing the zap theory of this telescope. This is even bigger. This is the world's largest telescope in China. It holds about 30 billion bowls of cornflakes. It's about 2,000 feet across. And one thing we're doing there is doing a big sky survey. And another thing we're doing there is looking at the best candidates from the SETI at home. Some of the SETI at home volunteers found interesting signals, and we're following up on those. There, we looked at about 200 of the best candidates from SETI at home. Another thing we're doing is looking for laser signals. We're building this telescope called PanoSETI, where we're trying to look at a lot of places in the sky for flashes of light, kind of like a lighthouse. And the problem with that is you might be looking over here, the flash is going off over here. So we're trying to build this thing kind of like a fly's eye with telescopes pointed out in different directions. We don't have that yet. We have just 3 telescopes at Lick Observatory, which is about a couple-hour drive from here. But we're starting to look for these laser flashes. And basically, it's just a camera, but it's a very fast camera. It's a camera that does 1 billion frames a second. So we're making a movie of the whole sky 1 billion times a second, so we can look for very short flashes. And I'm kind of excited about that because it's looking for kind of a whole new kind of search space that nobody's looked at before. And sometimes you make astronomical discoveries by just looking at something new, a new wavelength or a new size scale. In this case, a new time scale. We're looking for these short flashes. And maybe we'll find something. Okay, so the good news is that even though I think right now we've just scratched the surface in SETI, we're just getting in the game, we're learning how to do this, and I think we'd be very lucky right now, even though I'm very proud of our search, we're just looking at a small range of the whole spectrum. We look for certain signal types, but it might not be one of those. But it's getting better and better all the time. The telescopes are getting better. One of the problems in SETI is you don't know what frequency. So we used to listen to 100 channels at once, and now we listen to 100 billion channels. The computing power is getting better. So this exponential growth, even though I think right now we'd be lucky, I think in the long run, we might have the technology and the capabilities to find these civilizations if they're out there. This is a little different, all the different SETI experiments that have been done. And it's the idea is here, if you took the Earth's history, 4.5 billion years, and compressed it into one day, so 4.5 billion years into 24 hours, all of the SETI has been done in the last 0.002 of a second, just before midnight. We started with one channel, and now we have billions of channels, but it's all been done in the last 0.002 of a second. So we're just learning how to do this. We're thinking about these big telescopes. This doesn't exist, but how to build a telescope out of thousands of telescopes. I think in 10 or 20 years, there will be a way to take the spectrum of the atmosphere of a distant planet, an exoplanet, find out what the atmosphere is made of. We don't know how to do this now, but with a big telescope in space, we'd be able to tell you what chemicals are in the atmosphere. And some of those chemicals might betray the presence of life. When the Earth, in the early Earth, didn't have any oxygen in it, and that oxygen happened because of plants. The plants have photosynthesis, they make oxygen. So if you see oxygen that might be in a distant planet, that might mean there's plants there with photosynthesis. We might be able to detect technosignatures, civilizations that have built big structures or something like that. maybe in 100 years we'll be able to use the sun as a gravitational lens. That would make a telescope the size of the sun. It focuses out way beyond Pluto. If you put the camera back there, you have a really big telescope. Oh, I mentioned this is something we don't know how to do now. This is solar sailing, like how to get a spacecraft to the nearest star. And what you do is you launch a telescope in space that's a big sail. It's about maybe a few meters across. And then you have a 50 gigawatt laser on the ground. This doesn't exist. And you shine the laser light against that sail. There they go. And it pushes on it for 2 minutes. And it pushes and then it gets up to about 20% the speed of light. And you get to the nearest star in about 20 years. But you go flying past, really fast.
Would it be able to broadcast anything back?
Maybe, yeah. We don't know how to do that yet, but it's, yeah. But you might be able to send a picture back or something like that with a laser that bounces off the sail. So you could use the sail as a reflector, as a dish. I think maybe maybe I'm going to skip this part about SETI at home. I just want to get to maybe a few science things. Okay. A couple of my favorite quotes about SETI. Phil Morrison said that SETI is the archaeology of the future. And I think if we ever find another civilization, they might be a billion years ahead of us. They'll tell us how to get on the galactic internet. We'll learn how they got through their bottleneck and stopped killing each other, all their music, poetry, science, medicine. So there's a lot we could learn and kind of help us figure out what's in our future. Carl Sagan said that SETI is profound either way. And I think what he meant with that is that, if we get on the galactic internet, that's interesting. We could learn a lot. But it's also, if we do thorough searching, which we can't do now, but maybe in 50 years or something, we've looked at, a billion planets and nothing. That's also very profound. That means that life is incredibly precious, and we better take really good care of life on this planet. If you've been asleep, there's a summary slide. No ET so far. We're still working on it. It'll be a while. We had millions of people help us analyze the data from the SETI at Home project, and they contributed in lots of ways. They helped write the code. They sent in money to keep the students working on the project. And they composed music and literature, and a few people composed haikus. Actually, a few thousand people composed haikus. I'm not going to read all of them. Paula Cook, searching for life, answers are revealed about ourselves. And this is the last slide, the last haiku. Dan Sidner, 1 million Earthlings, bounded by optimism, leave their PCs on. So thank you very much.
I have a microphone here that might help you amplify your question or your deep insight. So Dan will guide us to you, and then we'll have a conversation.
Yeah.
I think I can project. Do you have a protocol? If you found a signal that's definitely ET,
Right.
what's your next step?
Right. What's the protocol? So, okay, so there is a little protocol, but it's just kind of in the beginning. So the protocol that we've signed and everybody else at the SETI signed says that if you find something interesting, before you make a big announcement, you should make sure that it's really interesting, and what you should kind of get independent verification. So you ask a different group with a different telescope, a different software, because there might be a bug in your code or something like that, or a graduate student playing a prank on you, and you ask them to see it. And also, if you have two telescopes looking at it, you can kind of triangulate on it and make sure that it's something very far away. You can measure its distance, not just some satellite that you happen to look like ET. There's a big problem when you look for radio signals from ET that, well, you find radio signals, but they're not ET, they're they're terrestrials. Where people have their cell phone. When these telescopes are, it used to be at Arecibo that it was a pretty quiet place, there wasn't much interference, but now there's a lot of radio frequency interference. And we may eventually have to go to the backside of the moon, where the moon would act like a big shield from all the radio, TV pollution. So there's a big problem with false alarms, so you've got to check it out first. But once you have some confidence that you found something interesting, then the protocol says that you have to make everything public. So all the information, the coordinates, the whatever interesting signal you found, the frequency, all the data you have, all has to be shared with the scientific and the public, and no secrets at that point. But you probably would say we found an interesting signal. We don't know what it is. Might be another civilization. It would be hard to probably in the early stages know exactly. It might be some new astrophysical phenomena. But that's as far as the protocol gets. Then all hell breaks loose, I think. Yeah.
Staying inside. There's the rock thrower's dilemma. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but we can accelerate rocks, right? And presumably within 100 years we'll be able to accelerate pretty large rocks with, say, lasers or something like that.
Yeah.
So if someone sends a pretty large rock pretty fast, you're not going to see it for very long before it's planet. So if you hear something at a state of technology where you know in like a couple hundred years there's going to be a rock, kind of the smart game in science, maybe to shoot a rocket at first before they shoot a rocket. So the game, the rock chucker's dilemma is maybe it's really good to stay silent, so that no one chucks a rocket. It's looking like true
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to that. I didn't know about that particular paradox or whatever you want to call it, but yeah, I'm sympathetic to that. And that's kind of why I think we should not be transmitting these signals out into space, trying to provoke. I think it's likely that advanced civilizations are going to be benevolent, but I don't really know. And I think that you're putting 8 billion people at risk, and it shouldn't be a decision made up by a bunch of people that have access to a transmitter. Yeah.
So you're focused on not just SETI, but on this whole sort of break. Living. So if you're a civilization that's 1 billion years older than
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
So
Good
if you have
idea,
a civilization that's 1 billion years
Louder, please.
older.
Oh,
If you
I
have
can
a
repeat the question.
civilization that's 1 billion years older than us.
You have to hold it near your mouth. You have to,
I think most people can hear me.
but they can't. So please.
You can't hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can repeat the question if you want.
It's on already. You just need to hold it near your mouth.
Just talking. Okay, good. So a civilization that's 1 billion years older, why wouldn't they have sent out millions of probes like we
Right.
did already to investigate all these nearby planets and stars? So why don't we see any probes?
Yeah, so that's why we don't see any probes. Yeah, I think this idea that a civilization 1 billion years ahead of us could build these self-replicating probes, and people have done this calculation, like if you make a self-replicating probe, it only takes about 20 million years to have them everywhere in the galaxy. I think that's a motivational. It's not. My thinking is that it's not so much about the technology. It's not could a civilization do that? You can sort of see how our technology is getting close to being able to do that. So my guess is it's not the limitation of a kind of science and technology problem. It may be like once you get on the galactic internet, you're not supposed to pollute the universe with probes, and you learn about rules of engagement and the prime directive, and it might be more of a motivation kind of political science question. But yeah, it's a really interesting question about why don't we see self-replicating probes? Why haven't? And there's a lot in that book that I mentioned about the probes, and people have looked for probes, but if they're small, they're very hard to find. So there could be probes in our solar system, and we just don't know about it. So if they, if ET wants to hide, we would not find them, because any advanced civilization will be able to. So on the other hand, if they don't care, maybe we could find their probes. But they have to be big right now.
All right, I don't think, is this good? Closer, wow. All right, I can do that. Is there any thought or consideration to the idea that maybe the probes that they would be sending out are something that we could never understand? So like if in that whole equation, maybe people who are part of this galactic empire are saying, and then there's this other, you know, when they learn to transcend the third dimension, that's another gate that we just haven't passed.
Okay, so could we understand them? Yeah, I think I don't know the answer, but there are a lot of speculation about this. I think if we intercept a television signal or something that wasn't meant for us, we won't be able to decode it. You know, and also I think if they intercept our television, they're not going to speak English or figure out much about us. But I do think it's still interesting, like we'll know that we're not alone, we'll see some evidence of their technology, but if we can't decode it, which is sort of likely if it wasn't meant for us, if it wasn't deliberately, you know, they want to talk to us, I don't think we'll be able to decode it. It seems unlikely because it was just meant for their internal communication. On the other hand, another possibility is that they're interested in starting up communication with a primitive civilization like ours, in which case it's likely that they will make it easy. Maybe they've had practice talking to primitive civilizations, they'll know what works and what doesn't. And I think it might be pretty easy for them to figure out maybe pictures or something they know works because they've done it before. Pictures, we think, you know, that they will be able to perceive their environment in 2 or 3 dimensions, and maybe they won't use the same colors that we use in black and white, but they'll be able to feel images, or maybe they see in ultraviolet. And I think pictures would be good, a way to start things off. Language, I think, would be hard, but you could teach language with pictures. So I think if it's deliberate, we have a pretty good chance of communicating. But if it's accidental leakage, probably you're right. We're not going to figure it out. Yeah.
So back in the 90s, obviously, Lake Michigan, the National Weather Station had seen several objects flying across the screen. Is there any more thought on that and what they could have been?
Actually, I'm not sure I know specifically about the thing you're talking about. I do have kind of a general thing about, there's a lot of things that people see in the sky. Some we do understand. You know, there's this whole thing about UFOs, and now they're not called UFOs, they're called UAPs, but it's the same thing. So a lot of the UFOs, now we actually understand what they are, and they're not ET. But there are a few things, there are some of these reports, we don't really know what's going on. And I would say, you know, maybe 1 out of 1,000 are, and so I do think that, I don't think it's likely that they're going to turn out to be ET, but I actually do think that they are worth pursuing. And NASA and the Air Force and military have now held meetings where they're trying to figure out what these things are. And people want to figure out for various reasons. So the military is interested because maybe it's the Russians trying out some new technology, you know, or something, or the Chinese or whatever, and they want to know if that's, you know, what they're working on. The physicists and the scientific community say maybe there's some new scientific phenomena that, you know, and we ought to learn how, you know, what's going on there. So I do think it's worth pursuing these weird events. I don't think any of them are going to turn out to be because they're alien visitors, but you know, I could be wrong. So it's worth pursuing at some level. Yeah.
You know, there's so much fear in this universe, and there's so many people concerned about the threat that might be posed by an advanced civilization. Does anyone consider the possibility that a truly advanced civilization wouldn't want to live in this universe?
Would an advanced civilization want to live? Oh, I see.
Yeah. E. Cummings said many years ago in one of his poems, he said, "Listen, there's a hell of a good universe next door. Let's go." Maybe that's what they're doing.
So they moved.
They moved.
Yeah. Okay, so the multiverse, could you move to a different universe? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's fun to speculate about the multiverse. So there's a lot of pros and cons about whether the multiverse exists. There's this idea that the universe appears finely tuned. So there's like 7 parameters. If you change the charge on the electron a little bit or change the gravitational constant just by a little bit, then the universe only lasts a nanosecond. It doesn't lead to all this complexity, you know, and you don't get life and stuff. And so the idea is maybe they're just trillions of universes and we just happen to live in the one that's finely tuned. That's kind of the anthropic principle. Another possibility is that maybe you don't need to invoke the multiverse. Like, so when I was a student, there were 30 of these numbers that were sort of looked like, you know, they were finely adjusted, and if you changed any of the 30, now there's only 7. So maybe that means that we learn more about physics and learn more about what's going on in the world. There are a lot of, we know that we don't know all there is to know about physics. There's a huge number of problems about dark energy and dark matter, stuff that we don't know anything about. So there could be new physics that we understand, and maybe there really aren't these 7 finely tuned parameters. My guess it'll go to 0, and we won't need to invoke the multiverse. And then, in which case, they can't move to a different universe. They got to stick in ours.
Yes, thank you. The Drake equation originally is very good at estimating, but apparently it way overestimates the number, because no matter what you put in, you wind up with a very large number, but there's a lot of missing factors, and you had several up there, like the tilt of the Earth and some others. And there's another I heard of, which is that to have life, you need to have a planet with heat, internal, and plate tectonics, and volcanoes in order to generate life.
Yeah, so some people think that you need all those things. Some people think maybe they're not that important. There's a lot of argument about plate tectonics and whether that is important for life. I really don't know the answer whether any of those things are important. And it might surprise us, you know, that when we find life on Europa or Enceladus, that maybe you don't need all those things. We just don't know the answer. But so, yeah, there's if the rare Earth people are right, that the life can only happen if you have this exact set of circumstances, and you were talking about a few of them, then life is going to be very rare.
The other missing factor we just learned about in the Drake equation is how many civilizations move to a better universe.
Right.
Dan?
Yeah.
So I actually have like a few questions, if that's okay. So my first one is, within the Drake equation, how do we compensate for the fact that we are looking at, like, because you know, light moves at your speed of light, and so we are looking at images that are going to be, you know, like either 2 million light years old or like that. So is there anything that is in place, either within the Drake equation or anywhere else, that like takes into consideration the like both the universe constantly expanding and then also
the finite speed of light and communication? So yeah, there are people who have thought carefully about that, and so it's interesting that you should bring up that question, because the astronomers have been thinking about that too, and so you're maybe you should be an astronomer. Maybe you are. So so if a civilization only lives for 50 years and they broadcast TV for 50 years, then you get this shell, instead of like this continuous bubble coming out, they just broadcast for a little while, and you get this little shell. And what's the chance that we would be in this little shell that's only 50 light years expanding out at the speed of light? And if civilizations are kind of like Christmas trees, where blinking lights are just going off and then they light up for a little bit and then they go off, it's going to be really hard to find them. And I think that's part of your question, like if they only live for a short amount of time, then they will give off radio waves or things that travel at the speed of light, but what's the chance that we'll be in that 50 years when it goes by us? And yeah, so I think it's kind of related in the Drake equation where he talks about the longevity, and somebody suggested, well, it's really not about longevity, it's really about how long do they transmit. And that's related to the speed of light and what's the chance that we'd happen to be at the right place at the right time to intercept that.
Thank you.
So yeah, you could. It's sort of like looking at a Christmas tree of blinking lights, but they only turn on for a little bit. You know, what's the chance that we be pointed at the right light at the right time?
2 quick comments. You kind of answered it. I came across an image that is wrong. That if you come out with your answer for the Drake equation prediction in a few 100,000 transmitting civilizations in our galaxy, there are these few 100,000 beacons. They're not. There are a few 100,000 fireflies. Or you said Christmas tree lights. Like on and off. And it really all depends how long they can transmit.
Exactly, yeah.
And I want to comment on you over there. You brought up a really interesting point. I used to think that, it'd be kind of boring to be looking for bacterial life on Enceladus or maybe deep within Mars, because that's not ET talking to us, and that's really all that counts. But now I don't think that at all, because the question of can life evolve easily, or is it incredibly difficult to evolve? It's one of the great unknowns in the Drake equation at this point. As Dan pointed out, 30 years ago we didn't know if planets were common. Now we know. Science is picking off some of these factors in the Drake equation and giving us a better sense of their value. Right now we have an n equals 1. Life happened on this planet. How hard is it to evolve? In biology laboratories, people are getting very good at taking complex chemicals and having them form precursors of RNA and DNA and amino acids. But they can never really prove that is how life started on Earth, and how probable was it to happen. So, if we find bacterial life on another moon or planet in the solar system, I think it's a fabulous answer to an important question, whether or not they happen to be intelligent Martians who built canals and can tell us how to live.
Oh, thanks a lot, Dick. That's nice. Very useful.
One more here, then I'll come back there.
Thank you.
Just one.
Okay, yeah. And then, so mine's about laser sales. Real close? Okay. So mine's about, we have a little bit of confusion about laser sales, because light doesn't have matter, like photons don't have matter. So how would they push something like physical away? Like, do you mean like an electron beam, like or is that what it's based on?
Yeah, it turns out there is something called light pressure. So there's Einstein worked out that light actually has an equivalent mass, and if you do shine light against something, it pushes on a little bit if it reflects off the surface. So you don't need electrons, you don't need sort of massive particles to push on it. Light will do that as well. But you need a bright light.
It's energy transmission.
Yeah. It's actually a really hard problem. That sail that I showed, it can only weigh about 1 gram. So, it has to be like super thin, only a few atoms thick. And we don't know how to build a 50 gigawatt laser. And what if you shine a 50 gigawatt laser on this little thing that's only a few atoms thick? Is it going to fly apart? It has to be super reflective, so it doesn't, if it's a little dark, it'll get really hot, it'll burn up. So it's not, I think your question is, like, it's a very tricky engineering problem. It's not an impossible thing, but we just don't know how to do it now. But people are starting to think about how to do it.
Dan, back here?
Is it possible that they are already here, but we are not able to recognize them?
That's one of the 75 solutions. So, yeah, I forgot to mention, but that is definitely, yeah. So the question, is it possible they're already here? That's one of the solutions to the Fermi paradox. So Fermi said, they should be landing at the White House, but maybe they're living amongst us, or, yeah.
This is really important.
Maybe Tucker is an alien.
Really close. I'm going to swallow this thing. If there is even a tiny chance that we're alone, aren't we obligated to freeze a bunch of DNA and RNA and shoot it in every direction at everything we can see?
Enceladus, stars, the moon, anything.
You'd like to preserve life on the planet? Yeah, I think, people are, you probably know about these projects where people are trying to preserve all the little seeds and DNA from different plants, and they put it up in Antarctica, and you're saying let's put it on the moon or something.
Well, you talk about
Yeah.
self-replicating probes. We're
Yeah.
really good at self-replicating.
Uh-huh.
We like it.
Yeah.
So maybe we just need to shoot some self-replicating probes out there.
Yeah. I don't know. There's lots of pros and cons, but I mean, certainly if you want to preserve life, because of this thing where we're endangering the whole planet and life on the planet, these people that are, putting it up in Antarctica, I think, all these little the different plants and different seeds and different DNA fragments. Maybe we should do what you're doing, what you're suggesting, and put it not just one place.
So just tied to those last two, what if we are the aliens in that there are a number of things that can survive in space for long periods of time, tardigrades, other complex protein or compounds. So could comets that have put water on the Earth brought those starting elements of life to the Earth, so that what we've done is evolved from Earth from life from elsewhere?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, so this is related to, I was talking about Enceladus, and like if we find life on Enceladus or Europa or Titan or something like that. What'll be very interesting is to see if that life is the same chemistry, exactly the same 20 amino acids, DNA, because if it's exactly the same, that might mean that we're from there or they're from Earth. So we know that rocks are flying all over the solar system. We have rocks from Mars in our lab where I work, and we didn't bring them back from Mars. A big rock hit Mars, things went flying all over the solar system, and some of them landed in Antarctica, and we brought them back to our lab. So if life was on one of those rocks, maybe we have life from Mars. In fact, there are some people at Stanford that said that one of their rocks from Mars has life on it. They're wrong, but they still cling to that idea. So I think because rocks are flying around, like you were saying, it could be that we are not from Earth, that we are not Earthlings, we're Venusians or Saturnians, or it could be the other way. But if we go to Europa and we find that life is a little different, so there's 200 amino acids and we're made out of 20 that maybe happen to be in the tide pool, but if it's made out of a different amino acids, or it doesn't use the same 4 nucleotides or something, then that means independent biogenesis. It got started separately there, and that means life is everywhere. But if it's identical to us, maybe it's just a rock flew around.
Okay. Right now I'm reading Neil deGrasse Tyson's book, The Starry Messenger. And Neil wrote in there, we might exist in a computer simulation programmed by intelligent juvenile aliens living in their parents' basement. Or could planet Earth be a zoo, like a terrarium aquarium constructed by alien anthropologists? No, sorry. And another point, we may not have the senses to see, hear, and feel everything. We have animals, all sorts of creatures right here that can see and sense and feel and smell things we can't. So this is sort of an area where somebody coming might have these other features that we can't sense. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, he's a great writer. The zoo hypothesis is kind of fun. So it could be that that's one of the solutions to the Fermi paradox. This idea that, they think of us kind of like ants, and like we think of ants. And so they are maybe studying us, but they're not really interested. We don't want to communicate with ants. And so they're studying us like, we look at creatures in a zoo or something like that. But they're so far ahead of us that they're just not going to bother. That's the zoo hypothesis. There's another one you mentioned that's kind of fun. Oh, the idea that we're in a simulation of some teenage kid has written some Python code. And, so yeah, I sort of doubt that's true, but a friend of mine wrote on his website, so if what we're living in is a simulation and it's written by software, there should be a way maybe to add features to that software. And he wanted to know if there are any like feature requests. If any of you guys want to change the universe a little bit, you should be able to talk to these kids that wrote the code and say, well, you know, I'd like to be able to rewind and go back. Anyway, on my friend's website called the Continuum Hypothesis, you can read about all these people that said, well, if the universe is software, we should be able to change it a little bit. And so there's a list of all these different features that people would like to add. Some of them are not very pleasant. Some of them are kind of nice. Anyway, it's kind of fun to speculate about how you might want to improve the universe if the universe is really software.
Sorry. So this is probably not what you want to talk about, but I'm curious about SETI, because I remember when it was new and it was so fabulous, and everyone's like, oh, let's open our computers up to it. That would be great. And I remember every few years checking in, just seeing what's going on. And you mentioned it in a couple of, I don't know when it was, months ago, years ago, it was just going to stop. What happened?
The ultimate fate of the universe?
No, with SETI.
Oh.
With the SETI project.
With SETI.
With somebody, with just the SETI at home, yeah.
Yeah.
They just had run out
So
of people.
SETI at home, for those of you who don't know, the problem with SETI is that there's many unknowns, and it turns out to do a careful search, you need a lot of computing power to look for all the different frequencies and all the different signal types. So we used to build these big supercomputers, but then we asked people around the world to help us analyze the data. And we ran SETI at home for 20 years, and we built the biggest supercomputer on the planet for a while, and the most sensitive search that's ever been done. But the Arecibo telescope collapsed a couple, 2 or 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 2020. And so we didn't have a source of data. But since then, we've been kind of analyzing the data that the volunteers, so they found about 20 billion signals, so we're going through that to find the most interesting ones. And those are the ones we're checking out on the FAST telescope. We've also been talking to the Chinese about maybe taking data for a new SETI at home project on the FAST telescope, even bigger than Arecibo. So we're thinking about relaunching the volunteer part of the SETI at home project, but not right now. We're still concentrating on the best candidates. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the part of that equation that talks about intelligent life, and just wanted to know your opinion on what do you think the likelihood is, or have you guys considered that genetics and natural selection might work differently in other systems?
Genetics and evolution work differently in a different system.
You still might have natural selection and
Right.
drive things towards intelligence, but it might not be like,
Yeah, so
in that respect.
there's a lot of, it's an interesting question. There are a lot of different parts to it. So my guess is that if we ever find life on a different planet, it won't have the same chemistry. It won't be based on RNA or DNA, but it probably will have some kind of self-replicating, some structure that does evolve with some kind of selection pressure. But the actual chemistry and the mechanism, my guess, will be surprise us. It won't be like us. But then there's this other question about could there be life without evolution? And I think that's quite possible. You could have something that is just replicates itself perfectly every time, never changes, but is successful, and that could be the dominant form. That's an interesting question. Yeah, but it won't be sophisticated then, because however it got started, it's not going to change after that.
So that would mean that whatever estimates you may be overestimating that intelligence number.
Yeah.
Just one more question.
I think you combine two things. One is genetics and the mechanism that is used to make mistakes, mutations, to pass on either perfectly or imperfectly something. And then the best solution at a given time, having the most offspring, winds up propagating. That's natural selection. It doesn't depend on whether it's DNA, RNA, or whatever. So that will probably be quite different. But the process of natural selection, better mathematicians than I, Richard Dawkins claims that it's the only way that life could evolve. And part of the definition of life is that it undergoes Darwinian selection. Because basically, if you've got more than one organism, or more than one proto-cell that does better than all the others, and makes more of its own progeny, that wins out. That's natural selection. And that's almost inevitably bound to happen anywhere there's life. So better mathematicians than I think.
I'm just curious.
That's different than whether or not the chemistry is
If
different.
like the molecules were different, if the genetics was different, could you just end up with far less variability?
There are different mutations rates for different organisms. Yeah, sure, absolutely. But if there were no variability,
that's not life.
It's not likely. And also, I think, and this is again a guess, this is a Drake equation guess, I think intelligence is a powerfully selectable property, as Dan once mentioned. You'd have hard shells, you could run fast, or you could be smart, and I think being smart is something that will probably evolve in many, many situations. That's it. Shut me up.
In just a moment, we're going to give our speaker a big round of applause, but as you contemplate that, please think about thanking some other entities, including yourselves. What a great audience you've been. Thank you for the questions. Thank you to Hotmo for hosting us. Remember, the next Wonderfest event here, 2 weeks, is entitled Perception and Attention, and maybe a little psychedelics. Please join me in thanking Dan Werthimer.